As we wait for the FOMC meeting today for Jerome Powell to tell us if the stock market is doing well or not so well in the future, based off him raising rates, which alone should tell you this ain't capitalism, this ain't free market capitalism. I want to talk about what Bernie Sanders said the other day, which is no surprise, but I want to talk about it in the context of inflation, because inflation is good for the government. You know, it's bad politically, people don't like it, but when the government has a debt problem, like Weimar Germany did after World War I, and they owed reparations in gold, inflation helped them, right? To a certain extent. Now, what did Bernie Sanders say? Number one, I want to put this in context. Remember the income tax in the United States. First, it went out to just the rich. That's how they sold it, right? Just the 1% are going to pay income tax because it's based off this much income. And then everyone hit that income level. Another example of how inflation helps the government. Because if they say, hey, we're not going to tax you over this amount, only those filthy, nasty rich people are going to get taxed, then it causes inflation. Everyone gets taxed at that level. So let's take a look at this article here. Bernie Sanders comes out and says the government should confiscate all wealth over 999 million, meaning no billionaires should exist. Now, we could have a nuanced conversation about tax rates, but one of the things that I don't think is so nuanced that I think everyone can understand is that if the government was taking 100% of a dollar amount over 999 million, what would be your motivation to make more money over 999 million? A lot of people think, well, the people would want to help people. And here's the thing. The government doesn't help people. The government who confiscates that money is not doing good things with it. They're not helping people with it. They are using it to pay off people, to keep inflating the system, to remain solvent because they overspend. They can't even balance a budget themselves. So, leaving aside whatever tax rate you think should be appropriate, but if it's 100% tax rate, why would anyone in their right mind keep making money if they're taxed at 100%? I wouldn't do that. Maybe you would because you like working and giving 100% of your money to the government, but I would not, right? I would think human beings, which is the one thing like people forget about in Washington, they don't understand economics and incentives. No one's going to do that, no matter what side of the aisle you vote on. But interview with Chris Wallace, Wallace asked, sir, are you saying that billionaires should not exist? So you're basically saying that once you get over 999 million, that the government should confiscate all the rest? And then Sanders says, I'm saying that we should go back to a very progressive tax policy, like what we had under Dwight D. Eisenhower. Wallace, which means that over $1 billion, basically, it goes to the government. And Sanders says, you may disagree with me, but fine. Yeah, I think people can make it on 999 million. And in today's world, people are like, who can't make it on 999 million? Fine. That's what they said when they proposed the income tax, right? And you may be a fan of progressive taxes, meaning the more you make, the more you get taxed, which is what we have today. But going back up to 90% taxes in the upper echelon of money. But my question is, will that get reformed if there's inflation? Will that get reformed if there's hyperinflation? When everyone is a billionaire? And what is it that causes hyperinflation? Because I referenced Weimar Germany earlier, and they owed their reparations not in marks, but in gold coins, gold, right? So they owed reparations in productivity. You have to think about what we owe our taxes in, our expenditures of the government. If you look at their balance sheet, yes, they can pay the bonds and just print money, but what about Medicaid and Medicare? Is that a dollar amount, or is that a good or a service? And if that good or service goes up in cost with inflation, how is inflation helping the government? So if they print money to pay for that, those things end up costing more money, which causes them to print even more. And between Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, we owe like 120 trillion, some ungodly number. And the same goes for the military. The military, they goods and services, right? Warplanes and all that stuff. Medical coverage, same thing with the VA. So there's a lot of bills that we have that you might as well just substitute gold for that because it's a good or a service. So it keeps up with the rate of inflation. So government bills go up as we print. So the only thing that doesn't, hypothetically speaking, is bonds, because eventually, like I think, the Fed's going to have to come in and buy all the debt and do yield curve control, meaning keep the yields down. But let's take a look at old Weimar. You guys know the story, most of you do, but the Treaty of Versailles said, hey, you owe money because of World War I. But let's take a look at the effects of inflation. This will blow your mind, okay? And a lot of people are calling for hyperinflation in the United States. I am not, right? When I think you will see it is when money starts to be handed out to the average Joe and Jane. So if we start to see UBI, if the deficit gets insane where Social Security and yield curve control is kicking in, because if you think about yield curve control, that means the Fed is printing money to buy government debt, and then the government debt that the government is taking out is handing it out to seniors. So they are not taking money out of the economy to hand to seniors like they're doing today, hypothetically speaking. Right? They're not taxing me because they can't tax me enough to give seniors enough money. So they are literally printing money to hand to seniors to give them that IOU for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. So there's more currency units that were not pulled out of the system that are being injected into the system. That's what happened in Weimar Germany. So that's when I think you're going to see hyperinflation. So I don't think that's going to happen very quickly, right? When I say quickly, I mean, I think we're going to live in an inflationary world, 10, 20, whatever the government says, double it. We're going to live in that world, but it's not until the government starts printing and handing out stimmies like they did in 2020 and 2021. And the more stimmies they hand out, the next time they got to go even bigger and bigger and bigger to keep up with the inflation. That's when I think we'll see hyperinflation. But reading from this Mises Institute article, Germany had a large and wealthy middle class, and exactly this class was hit the hardest hit. Surprise, surprise, that's the same here in the United States. The rich own assets and the poor get government help. Especially desperate was a situation of people living off rents. Many, sound familiar? Many families of high repute constituted a significant part of the high officialdom, lost all their property and status. Further reading, the price of a mark differed strongly at the stock exchanges outside the prices of Germany. This attracted many foreigners to buy and live in Germany for cheap, yada, 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 the exchange rate. They started instituting rationing laws. They started instituting price controls. But here's the chart that blows my mind, right? I've heard this stat. In January of 1919, there was 2 trillion total, I believe, German marks. And by 1923, a newspaper cost 2 trillion German marks. So if we're looking at Bernie Sanders' proposal, you're like, huh, yeah, billionaires suck, but everyone becomes a billionaire. Just like everyone started paying income tax because everyone was making more money because the government loves inflation. Because those laws they write for the big fat cats, the rich, all of a sudden apply to everybody else when inflation comes. Okay. So this is the part that blows my mind: the exchange rate of dollars and marks. And I don't think this is a one-for-one swap when it comes to how the United States compares to Germany at that time. It is not. We have the world reserve currency. There's a lot of other cross currents, but it was 7, almost 8 in January of 1919. By November of 1923, it was 130 billion to 1. That's what happens when you're forced to spend more than you're taking in, and you have to print the difference. The question is, to me, what are the parallels in the United States? And I kind of I've taken some of this from Luke Groman. We owe our citizens, the government does at least, in goods and services. Look at the big ones: Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Take up about 2/3 of our budget. And the forecast is we're going to owe like 120 trillion to these people. So we made a promise that we cannot cash, because government shouldn't make promises in perpetuity because they can't tell the future, right? But it was politically palatable at the time to come out with Social Security. Great. But what that means is, how do they come up with the difference? Social Security is supposed to be broke by 1930, or at least insolvent, meaning the treasury's gone. And so they are going to have to take a 20% cut. Me knowing the government that we have, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to print the difference. And as they print the difference, inflation goes up. And since Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are either indexed to inflation or a good in service, as inflation goes up, they will have to print more money to cover Social Security. See the problem? So this is like a snowball going downhill, right? It starts slow, and as it gains momentum, you're seeing it with these banks, right? The banking crisis. Everything's fine, and then the second biggest bank, and then the first biggest bank fails. There's more and more and more banks failing, because as the problem compounds, it gets worse and worse and worse. As it picks up speed, it gets worse, and it takes out more people, and that's what I think inflation is going to do. No one knows the time or the timing of it, but obviously it's picking up speed. And as it picks up speed, it just takes out more and more people, in my opinion. I'm definitely interested to see what Jerome Powell does. I think he's going to raise rates one more time, which at this point we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And yes, it's going to cause more pain and blah, 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 blah. But as Jerome Powell does that today, on the back end, they're bailing out banks with FDIC money. So in all reality, the rich aren't suffering from all the loans they took out. It's you that are suffering, the middle class and the poor, from them raising rates. Because what happens is Schumpeter's creative destruction. As they raise rates, that all these people that took too much risk, which is the rich, a lot of people who are rich took out a bunch of loans that are risky. Fine, it's your prerogative. But if they fail because you can't refinance them at a lower rate, then that's on you. But it's not actually, because if your bank fails, then the FDIC is going to come in, and JP Morgan Chase, wink, wink, with taxpayer money is going to bail out your bank. So it's crushing the poor and middle class. It's going to crush jobs. And on the back end, they're still handing out money to the rich, which tells me that it's not as altruistic as some people might think what Jerome Powell is doing. Some people think he's actually trying to crush inflation, which may be, right? I can't get in the guy's head, but the fact that at the same time, the banks of the rich and wealthy are being bailed out, seems like it's a dual purpose, right? Seems like if you wanted to crush inflation, one of the things that would do that is crushing bad investments. I don't know. Thinking out loud. You guys let me know what you guys think. I don't think we are Weimar Germany, but it is interesting to see the parallels. Like, they owed gold, we owed goods and services. Gold and goods and services, they go up with inflation, right? And so we're going to see that problem as inflation persists and the government debt becomes a bigger problem, bigger part of what we spend money on here in this country. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.